I went to Hamburg in 1932 to see X-ray tubes because I felt we needed an X-ray therapy facility at the radiotherapy department in Sheffield, and I looked through everything I could find, and I decided that the tubes that were made in this country weren't reliable, and the only places that I could find that were likely were at Eindhoven, Philips, and Muller's at Hamburg. So I went to both places, and then we had a contract with Philips and Ferrantes. I was a patriotic chap, you see. I wanted a British contract, and Ferrantes were a British electrical firm in Trafford Park, Manchester, and I thought we ought to have reliable tubes. And so I put this up. We got a contract from Ferrantes, and it was for £1,500. They were to provide 2 X-ray tubes, the Greinacher circuit, and all to each to produce X-rays at 200 kilovolts, and to give about 100 rads at a distance of 40 centimetres. So that was that, and I was going to sign the contract with Ferrantes. Have I told you this before?
Sort of remember the bits of it, yes.
Oh, I may have told you before.
Carry on then.
Well, at any rate, I hate to repeat things if you've heard them before, but I was going to Ferrantes to sign the contract at the behest of the committee, and the night before I was due to go to Manchester, there was a friend of mine who was interested in ceramics actually, but he'd worked with Metropolitan Vickers, and he was on holiday from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute where he had a research scholarship, and mutual friends asked if I'd like to go and meet him at their house. And so I packed up the work. I used to work till about 8 o'clock at night, every night in the Royal Infirmary, preparing things and so on. At any rate, I went up and we had a party, and then I was seeing him home and he was seeing me home, and fortunately we didn't live far apart from each other, and on the way he told me about an X-ray apparatus that they had at Metropolitan Vickers, which they could take to pieces, put in a new filament and put together again. It worked at 50 kilovolts and was used for crystallography. And I thought, well, that sounds to me like what we want. And so I wrote a letter that night. I posted it. Now this sounds almost incredible now, but it's absolutely what happened. I posted it at 1:30 in the morning in the General Post Office in Sheffield, and saying to Metropolitan Vickers, saying I was coming to see Dr McKerrow, who was the head of the research department, at 9 o'clock the same morning. That's 7.5 hours after I posted my letter. And he got it, and they were waiting for me, and I saw this thing, and they told, apparently the secret was the vapour pressure of the fluid that was used in the pumps, and the vapour pressure of the apiaison oil was only 1/10 of that of mercury, which was used for most pumping. It was something new, you see, and so I thought, well, this sounds sufficiently promising, and I went along for my appointment with Ferrantes at 11 and told them I wasn't going to sign the contract. And they weren't very pleased, apart from anything else. The kind of thing they said to me was, aren't you rather young to go against the instructions of your committee? And I said, I'm old enough to know that I should. And then I went back and had to tell the committee. And the committee weren't particularly pleased, but they said that I and somebody from Metropolitan Vickers, of course, would be able to go with me, should go and see a radiologist in London and the chief of the X-ray department of the National Physical Laboratory, Sir GWCK. And we fixed a date, we went to see them. The radiologist, whose name I never mention because I feel it would be almost libelous, just talked about himself for half an hour, and then he said, I'm sorry, I must ask you to leave now, I've got an appointment. And I said, don't you want to ask us any questions about this contract? He said, I know all about it, I'll write a letter. That was that. Then we went to the National Physical Laboratory and we saw Dr. K, and Dr. K kept asking us questions and we kept telling him answers, and at the end of 2 hours he said, I think it's a justifiable experiment. And I said, could you write us a letter about that? And he said, I'm a civil servant and I can't write a letter about anything commercial, but I think it's a justifiable experiment. And so 2 days later I went before the committee and I was asked about these visits. There was a letter from the radiologist damning the whole idea completely. And the chairman read that letter and then he asked, is there a letter from Dr. K? And I just said no. As a civil servant he felt that he shouldn't write a letter, but he thought it was a justifiable experiment, and he talked to us about it for about 2 hours. And the chairman looked round at the committee, he said, well, that seems to settle it, doesn't it, gentlemen? And I saw red. It's the only time in my life I have seen red, and I really did. And I jumped up, my chair skidded back across the polished floor and banged into the wall behind, and I banged the table and I said, it doesn't settle it at all. The letter isn't worth the paper it's written on. He never asked us a single question. He never got to know anything about it from us, and besides that we couldn't have a better contract. Instead of a contract with £600 a year maintenance, which was a terrific proportion of £1,500 capital, we're going to be able to put it in, take it out at the end of 3 years, if we like, take it out at any time, and get all our money back, and they'll maintain it for us while we're using it. I said we couldn't have a better contract than that, and so we got the Metrovic contract, and well, it was a great success. It was the forerunner of the apparatus at Barts for 1 million volts, and people came from Barts. There was Professor Finzi, Professor of Radiology, Professor Hobson, Professor of Physics, Dottie Donaldson, Chief of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and Dr. Canty, who was a radio I suppose you'd call him a radiobiologist. And well, they came and saw the apparatus when it was installed and working, and went back and ordered a 1 million volt apparatus from Metrovix, which was the best apparatus of its kind. But apart from that, apparatus similar to ours was put in at Liverpool and Leeds and Edinburgh and Aberdeen and Middlesex Hospital, Southampton, Adelaide, Cairo, and then the war started. And Metropolitan, because as happened to so many British firms, when they'd used all their assets on war production, then the Americans took them over, you see. At any rate, it was, and then, well, the Americans discontinued the use of the continuously evacuated tubes because sealed off tubes were better after that, and that was what I had to use when I went to the London hospital.
Yes, you were saying about every patient's a research project.
What?
Every patient's a fresh research project.
Yes. No, that was... you've got to do that in a way, because every patient is different from every other. Just as every person is different from every other. And so I don't think you can obviously have routine types of treatment for certain things, but I think it's desirable to start on every patient and think, now, what's the best thing for this person? And sometimes it depends on the general condition of the patient. I mean, to jump to Oxford, for instance, I had a patient from a surgeon, what was his name? And at any rate, it was an old lady, cancer of the left breast, fixed to the chest wall, and he sent her to me. He said, "This lady's cancer is inoperable, can you treat it with cobalt?" And I said, "No." I said, to treat it with cobalt would be subjecting her to a lot of attendances, a long drawn out treatment, long drawn out reaction. I said, what I'd like to do in this particular case is have it excised, implanted and stitched up. And he said, well, it's inoperable and I don't operate on inoperable cancers. I said, oh. I said, do you mind if I do it? And so he said, no, you do it. For that I ought to have his name. However, I did it. And one of the reasons I hadn't wanted to subject her to a long continued treatment was that her cardiac condition was such that she hadn't got long to live. And what happened was that I removed it, implanted radioactive wire, and took it out, and the treatment was over in 5 or 6 days, and she went home. She died about 6 or 7 months later, I think it was, of a heart condition. And as it happened, about a year later, I think it would be, the same surgeon had another patient with almost exactly the same condition, but on the opposite side. And he said, it was just like this other old lady. Yes, I said, it's inoperable. I think she ought to be operated on in the same way. He said, yes, I'll do this one. And he did it, and I put the wires in. She lived for 5 years without any further trouble. I felt that was the point. When I got to Oxford, I'd got enough experience and enough confidence in the methods available in the dosages to be able to tell the surgeons what I thought should be done. And previously they hadn't been used to that. They'd been used to telling the radiologist what should be done, you see. And I remember Mr. Elliot Smith came to me one day at about 5 o'clock. I was getting late, and he said, I've got a lady here I want to treat with cobalt. He described it to me. I said, no, I'd rather not treat it with cobalt. I said, if we do, I've either got to give her so much that she'll have a lot of bowel trouble afterwards, or so little that we shan't cure it. I said, I want a mixture of implantation and external radiation with cobalt. And he said, well, if we're going to do that, I'd like us to do it as soon as possible, because it's 6 days since I did it, and we want to be able to separate the layers instead of having to cut it out again, you see. So I said, right, well, do it tomorrow. And so we arranged to do it the next day. And he was able to separate the layers, and I ordered, I got some plastic tubes with steel wires in, and put them from the groin right up to the diaphragm, along in front of the vertebra, because there were glands in front of the vertebra, which it took Peter away to be examined, but it wasn't by any means a block operation, you see, so it was bound to be followed by recurrences of growth. And so I told my registrar, I said, with the X-ray of these wires, I've been able to work out how much tantalum wire to put in, because the radioactive isotope we had then was tantalum, not iridium. And I said, I'd like you to do that because I've got to go to a meeting in London. But if you put it in, be careful to do it as carefully as possible, not to introduce any infection, because the top of the tubes is open. So it would be awkward if we got infection up here, for instance. And he did it very carefully, and there was no trouble. He took out I'd ordered the wire to come on the Saturday, and it came, and he took out the steel wire and put in the tantalum wire. See, I'd been able to use the steel wire for an X-ray to get the dimensions and so on, so as to work out the dose. And he put them in, and then they were taken out at the time I'd specified, and there was a sequel to this, because the patient, she was a student at the time, and actually her operation had been carried out by the gynecologist, who thought she had an ovarian cyst, but she hadn't. She'd got a cancer of the liver, of the kidney, which was extending, you see. And so the gynecologist had asked the surgeon, Mr. Elliot Smith, if he'd finish off the operation, because it was really the general surgeon's job. And so he did that, and then we did the rest together, and the tantalum wire was put in. It was taken out at the right time according to what I'd worked out, and then the patient never missed a period. She had 4 normal children, and she used to send me a Christmas card every year for about 6 years, and then didn't hear anything more about her till about 4 years ago, and I went to a peace meeting in Oxford, and I got there a bit early, and I was sitting next to an old chap. We introduced ourselves. He said, "Are you any relation to the Ellis who used to treat people for cancer?" I said, "Yes." He said, "My daughter, my niece rather, in America is considered something of a miracle case. She was dealt with 35 years ago." And he started to tell me about her. I said, "Yes, I can remember her name." I could then, I can't now. Edgar Lindsay. I could remember her name. And apparently she's developed a cancer of the breast, which has nothing to do with this. And all the American surgeons who've seen her think she's a miracle to have survived so long without any symptoms, you see. That's what I mean by saying each patient is a research problem.
Yeah.
Why I left Sheffield,
Mm.
why I left the London hospital,
Yeah.
then I retired,
Mm.
why I left Southern California,
Yeah.
why I left Milwaukee,
Yeah.
and why I left New York.
Okay.
Those are all things
Yeah.
which I haven't put down anywhere,
Right.
because
Yeah.
I've not really tried to explain anywhere why I've done these things.
Right. Okay.
But they are important in
Yeah.
a way.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about why I changed from one place to another.
Yeah.
I had a contract in Sheffield to on a salary plus private practice. But when I'd been working for about a year, I just said, I don't know enough to be sure that my judgment, especially as I'm developing a family, wouldn't be affected by financial considerations. I think that I ought to be on a full-time basis. And then that went on all right until it got to be about 1942, and I realised that there was a difference in status as accepted by the other staff and people generally, of people who were dealing with private patients on a private basis. and I felt that that was rather interfering with the question of the relationship between consultants. I being one consultant, somebody else being another, you see. And so I said to the committee, I'd like to go back now on my original contract, which I'd asked to be taken off. I said, I feel quite sure now that my judgment will not be affected by financial considerations, and so I think it's, from my point of view, it's safe for me to do that. As I put it now, I should think it was morally safe for me to do that. And the committee refused. And then, within a few months after that, I was approached by Tudor Edwards, who was the doyen of chest surgeons in Great Britain at the time, and was attached to the London Hospital, now the Royal London Hospital. And they were offering me a very advantageous type of contract to go to the London. And so, in view of what the committee had said, I felt justified in promising to go. And so I promised that I would go to London. And then Sir Ronald Matthews, the chairman of the Sheffield Radium Centre Committee, and also the chairman of the Royal Infirmary, and also the chairman of the LNER and that kind of thing, said to me, "Why on earth are you leaving us? We'll give you anything you want to stay." And so I said, well, according to the minutes of the last committee meeting, you wouldn't even give me back what I'd already asked to be taken off, because I thought now I should be all right. And he saw that, and that was that. And I've got a booklet with subscribers to a leaving present, and an address by Sir Ronald Matthews, which is interesting, and you might like to see it. And so I went to the London Hospital, and there I was building up a department during the war, you see. And then the war came to an end, and people who were on the consultant staff started to come back from the war, and it was quite clear that they weren't used to having a radiotherapist who could tell them what to do about patients. They wanted somebody whom they could tell what to do about patients. And I was quite prepared to put up with this, but I realised there was a kind of whispering going on about it, and what's more, on one or two occasions I was quite sure that the patients had not been referred to me because of this. They'd been dealt with elsewhere, or dealt with in a different way. And I felt, if there's this kind of thing going on, the only people who suffer are the patients. And so when the job was advertised in Oxford, I applied and was appointed. And then, when I got to Oxford, Mr. Sanctuary was the administrator for the United Oxford Hospitals, and I'd been appointed and I'd actually got children at school in Oxford and bought a house in Oxford, and he said to me, "You know, we haven't any money here for radiotherapy. There's a good centre already at Reading, we don't need one here. And there's a good job going in Belfast, why not apply for that?" Well, not very encouraging. However, I told him I've been appointed here, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to see about getting some money. And I went to see Lord Charwell and James Janet Vaughan and got some money and got started, and now of course it's a multi-million, well, it's $1 million project, and the Sheffield thing is a hospital with 15 consultants for radiotherapy. They all started because of what I did, really. And the London hospital is combined with Barts now. But the Barts radiotherapy department must have been stronger than the London. They had a 1 million volt apparatus, but their 1 million volt apparatus was produced following a visit from Barts to Sheffield to see the apparatus that Metrobic had put in for me at my request, and in the design of which I had helped. The deputation from Barts consisted of Professor Finzi, the radiologist, Professor Donaldson, the obstetrician, Professor Hobson, the physicist, and Dr. I know his name, but I've forgotten it just now, but I'll remember it. The radiation research worker in a radiobiological research worker, you see. And after seeing the apparatus we had and talking to me and so on, they decided to put in an order to Metropolitan Vickers for the 1 million volt apparatus, which was the first 1 million volt apparatus in this country, and probably the best one in the world of its kind at the time, you see. And so the Sheffield work had influenced what they did. And then, as I say, I moved to Oxford, and I've told you why. And then, at one stage actually, Sir Thomas Lodge, who had been my assistant for a time and then became a diagnostic radiologist and had been knighted, I don't quite know why, but I think this is the kind of sequence that, oh dear. Forgetting his name. Dr. somebody who was a registrar in Sheffield, and then during the war he became a professor in Manchester, and then became president of the Royal College of Physicians. And I think his influence knighted the other chap whom I've just mentioned, whose name I've forgotten now. At any rate, that's what I think about it, looking back on it, you see. And I think Lodge said to me, "Would you like to come back to Sheffield?" And I said, "I'll come back to Sheffield if they'll make a chair," because I felt that radiotherapy ought to get a bit more academic status. And that was the last I heard of it. But what was the name of this chap? I don't know. It'll come back to me. I think he would have been prepared to have me knighted, possibly. That was my feeling afterwards, you see. But what I thought was important was to get academic status for radiation therapy. And so that was that. And it didn't, there wasn't any suggestion of making a chair in Sheffield, and so I stayed in Oxford. And I stayed in Oxford until I retired at the age of 65. I got a merit award, top merit award, and then I was really hoping to get a job in Zambia. I'd been round the world, including 2 weeks in Zambia, a year or two before I retired. And actually President Kaunda and his wife invited me to tea one day. I was quite amused because they were complaining of the heat and I wasn't. I was really amused about that because I didn't seem to feel the heat as much as they did. But what I hoped was that when I retired they'd offer me a job in Zambia, because I had ideas about developing a cancer service in Zambia, which would be more or less comprehensive, you see. But nothing happened. They did send a patient over to me for treatment in Oxford, and I treated him, and I thought they were probably trying to find out what I did for him. And then nothing further happened, and so I was offered a job in Southern California, and I said I'd go there when I retired, and a month or two afterwards I was offered a job in Zambia, but I'd already promised to go to Los Angeles, you see. And then why did I leave Los Angeles? Well, I felt that there wasn't enough interest in radiotherapy. The man in charge spent most of his time making budgets and didn't see many patients. I had what I thought was a good idea. No attention was paid to it. And then I was asked if I'd go to Milwaukee to be in charge of the department. Well, in both places I was to be a professor, see, and I in both places. I said I'd go, but I wasn't going to take an examination to be licensed there, which was really almost a qualifying examination. I just said I'd be prepared to go, but not to do that. And so that meant that to avoid me taking a license, they had to do something at the Capitol with the Senate and so on. And in Los Angeles they were a bit slow about this, and consequently, to pay me the salary they'd promised, they had to give me a hospital appointment. I was a professor in the university, but my hospital appointment was about the lowest in the low, universal helper or something. And then eventually my license came through from the Capitol, something or other, and I was immediately promoted from the lowest to the highest in the hospital, and that was that. But I had what I thought were one or two good ideas, and they didn't even get into the budget. And so when I was asked if I'd go to Milwaukee, I said I'd go. And there they had to do the same kind of thing with the Senate of Wisconsin, and my license number was VP1. And I was a professor in the University of Wisconsin, and developed things. And then why did I leave there? We were very comfortable. We bought a house, and everything was going nicely and smoothly, but a surgeon paid no attention to what I said about treating a patient, and instead of saving his arm, he took off the whole lot down to the ribs, all round here. And well, I disapproved of that. I thought it was unnecessary. But he'd been at the Memorial Hospital in New York. He'd been trained as a cancer surgeon there, you see. That was what he'd been taught. And any further ideas didn't count. And then I was asked a month or two after that if I'd go to the Memorial Hospital in New York. And I thought, well, if I go there I might be able to change what they do. So I said I'd go, and then I left Milwaukee where we were quite happy, and went to New York, and I was there about 2.5 years. They did ask me if I'd be in charge of the department there, and I said, well, probably I'm going back to England, so it probably wouldn't fit in. So they didn't do that. And then I was asked if I'd be in charge of another department in New York State, and I said no, and I was on the way back. And then I thought, well, it would be nice, all these computers coming along, it should be possible by using computers to try and get statistics, world statistics for cancer. And so I thought I might possibly be able to do that. So I had to leave the Memorial Hospital at the end of the academic year in which I was 70, because of their bylaws or something. And So I went to Newark, New Jersey, hoping to do this with computers, but everybody had their own computers, and they all wanted to do their own thing with computers, and it was quite obvious I wasn't going to get any further with that. So after 15 or 18 months, I'm not quite sure how long, I left there and came back home.
Most of the things you've got typed up are about your work.
Yes.
I'm also quite interested in your non-work.
Yes.
Kind of things like your being a Quaker, and for example.
Yes. Well, I think there could be a kind of general talk, then a talk about the kind of research in the department, then talk about my clinical research, and then a talk about something else, probably. You know, that kind of thing could fit in that kind of way. But I must say, I have not been as energetic as I ought to have been.
In what way?
Well, in dealing with these.
Oh, we're dealing with, right, okay, yeah. But tell me about you being a Quaker then, because I find that interesting.
What?
Tell me about your being a Quaker.
Oh well.
Or when did you?
That was an accident. And obviously, I was brought up as a Methodist.
Right.
I was married at a Methodist chapel. You've seen my wedding photograph.
Yeah.
That was, and I went to the Wesleyan Methodist chapel where I lived until we moved away from there to Conduit Road, and then I went from there to St John's Methodist Chapel where I got married, and then when I qualified I continued to go there, but a bit less regularly and more sporadically, and that was because I was very busy. And then when I went to London, we lived in a village, Whitford, and there wasn't anything except a church there, and there was a Quaker meeting at Hertford, 6 miles away, and partly to get away from the telephone, I started going to the Hertford meeting on Sunday morning, and I've been going to Quaker meetings ever since. It just seems to suit me. And I've been to Quaker meetings there. And then when I left London, I came to Oxford, went to the Quaker meeting here, and then when I retired, I went to the Quaker meeting in Los Angeles, and then in Wisconsin, and then in New York, and then in East Orange, and then back to England in Chalbury. When we got to Chalbury, we got a house there called the Old Bakery, and I bought that when I was about to retire, and regarded it as a place to retire to. And then, while I was in America, I met some people. Some people must have sent them with a letter of introduction, called Bennett, and they were on the point of buying a house in Chalbury. We already had one. And they stayed in our flat for a time in New York, and then when we got back to England, of course, we got to know them again. And in Chalbury there had been a Quaker community, but it had stopped. The Quaker meeting house was on lease to an architect. It got a 5-year lease. His lease ran out and he applied for another 5-year lease. And I said to the treasurer, look here, I don't think you should have a 5-year lease. Give him a 3-year lease instead. If you give him another 5-year lease, he'll have a kind of moral justification for considering that he might be able to stay there. Whereas if you give him a 3-year lease, it will indicate that you're still in charge. And I think there's going to be a growth of Quakerism in Chalbury. I don't know why I thought that. I must have thought he felt very strongly about it at the time. At any rate, Dorothy and I had a Quaker meeting in our house, and then we got the Quakers started, and eventually they got back into the old meeting house, and the architect took over a filling station which he used as his office, and it ceased to be a filling station, you see. So that now there's a vigorous Quaker community in Chalbury. So that's the kind of way things happen. But I don't know whether you're interested in this, but for a long time I was an agnostic. I'd never been an atheist, but I was an agnostic.
Yeah.
And then recently, as a result of, I don't know whether you're interested in this, these are recent thoughts, you see. I decided that the universe started here, that God's here, and there's a tremendous intelligence there. The reason I think of it is like that is this, that the astronomers looking at stars and planets in the universe, everything seems to be going away from them, whichever way they're looking. Now, that commonsensically suggests that they're all going away from the Earth. Well, they're the kind of common sense that Einstein used. He said a man in a lift doesn't know whether the lift's going up or down. See? So I feel that kind of common sense is justifiable. Well, now, if that is the case, I mean, supposing we were at the edge of the universe, at least some things would seem to be coming towards you. But we're not at the edge. The only evidence we've got is what people have got by looking from here. Now, am I boring you?
No.
Yeah. Well, it's agreed that the universe started with the Big Bang. Everybody seems to agree about that, everybody who matters. And the only condition is that it wasn't instantaneous, that it took some time. Only a fraction of a second, but that was enough. The fact that it took a fraction of a second makes everything fit in. I've not the slightest idea why, but I understand that's the case. Well, if the Big Bang started here, why did it? What made the Big Bang start at all? Well, there was a physicist called Schrödinger, and he got the Nobel Prize for physics, but he also published a book in 1944 called What is Life? Well, you know the Sanger-Law thermodynamics. All energy tends to a certain level which is incapable of producing any work. Well, from what Schrödinger said, you see, good idea, any form of life is a form of building up energy which can also do things, it can produce energy. So it's a spike sticking up out of the sea of entropy. And at present, the number of living creatures, you know, if you consider the bacteria and the insects and the plankton and the plants and the animals and the grasses, everything, there are a terrific number of spikes of energy on there. But that's what's happening now. But some creature, some intelligence, and I don't see why I shouldn't call it God, just built up energy and energy and energy. And according to Hawkins, the concentration of energy was of the order of 77 times, no, 10 times itself 70 times in terms of tons into a space about a cubic inch. Absolutely, it may, I mean, it's, you can't imagine it really, but that apparently was the origin of the Big Bang. And my explanation is that God built it up like that until he got so that he couldn't control it anymore and it exploded. And that's the universe. Now where God came from I don't know. What do you think of my hypothesis?
Well, no, it makes sense to me. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's not. It's got as much sense about it as such a lot of things.
Mm.
So,
but if God was the coalescence of all this energy, then was the Big Bang the end of God exploding?
God consciously built it up.
Right, but I mean, living things.
Any living thing,
yeah,
is a source of energy.
Yeah.
When we die, it all goes and we go back into entropy.
Yeah, yeah. But the energy is within ourselves.
Yes, any chemical reaction going on, you see, is producing energy. And we're full of chemical reactions all the time.
Yeah, but this energy coming together, why wasn't that, within God, or whatever you want to call it? If you're following your analogy with living things accumulating energy inside themselves, then isn't your description of the Big Bang about God exploding?
Yeah.
Rather than making...
It wasn't God exploding, it was what he got together exploded.
Yeah, but... Okay, but
he's still there.
Yeah, but we don't get things together, do we?
We don't what?
We don't bring energy together in the way you've described.
We do. We bring energy together every time we that's the thing about life, you see. Every chemical reaction builds up energy.
Yes, okay.
And we are energy. I mean, if we were burnt, for instance, we should produce heat. If we die, even the fossil will produce heat, fossil fuels, you see. But we've got to realise that when we die, we're dead, and we're producing very little energy.
Oh, you said you were an agnostic for a long time. Was that before you became a Quaker, or recently, or?
Oh, it's always been the case.
Right.
Yes, I was agnostic even while I was a Quaker, because I couldn't believe that I had to believe in a God, but I didn't believe that the Mohammedan God or the Hindu God or the Buddhist God or the Christian God or the Methodist God or the Catholic God were all better than anybody else's. You see, I think really the really important thing about the world now and about the human race is the mind. That's something different from ordinary life. Insects haven't got a mind, so not so that you notice. And some mammals have minds, but they're mostly concentrating on eating and procreation. That's what they're concerned with. And so the human mind is something different. And so that brings me to how I think the United Nations should work.
Right.
I wrote something out 2 days ago about how I think the United Nations should work. I got 2 people from the Wyndham House to come and say what they thought about it. I don't think they thought much of my ideas. They're concerned with what the United Nations is doing already. Well, that's all right. The United Nations isn't stopping wars. It's not stopping people being killed who've done nothing wrong. Women and children are being killed. Other women and children are going hungry because of this war. And the United Nations was formed to stop war. But it doesn't stop war. Well, I think that what the United Nations ought to be concerned with is trying to make sure that the species, the human species, survives. Because if they don't, it'll die off, just as the dinosaurs did. But the dinosaurs probably didn't have much of a mind. It wasn't big enough up here to hold one. But I think human beings have, and that's the thing. And I mean, there are billions and billions of human beings, and no 2 of them are alike, are they? And well, I think that it should be a kind of United Nations association, and they should have complete power to regulate things so that population's controlled. It's very important. So that food and water are evenly distributed. And if any nation started allowing its population to increase without control, cut down the aid to them so that they couldn't feed them. And if the dictator in charge thinks, I'm not going to have that, send some people in like the SAS, winkle them out, try them before an international court. But don't go to war. Just have a kind of camp with about 1,000 people, with 3 or 4 of each language, 3 or 4 of each religion and so on, all living together and getting to know the techniques similar to what the SAS used, and having an international court which acts according to the laws made by the United Nations Association. I'm sorry I shoot my neck off about all these things.
Well, no, it's fascinating.
What?
It's very, very interesting.
Well, I am interested. I probably shouldn't be, but I am.
So, you don't find it a problem being a Quaker and an agnostic at the same time?
Oh no. I think the really important things are believing in the truth. As far as I'm concerned, that means worshipping God, whoever God is, helping other people, forgiving your enemies. Those are the 3 things that matter. And if we do that, we can live at peace in the world. And it doesn't matter what religion we have. And any religion which doesn't want to forgive its enemies is wrong and should be dealt with internationally. Any religion that kills people should be dealt with. I mean, I would think that the thing to do is to winkle out Mr. Bush and to try him before an international court. Mr. Powell as well, probably Mr. Blair as well. See, I was a member of the Labour Party until about 3 or 4 months ago. I've thrown out of it because I don't support Mr. Blair now.
So you resigned your...
What?
You resigned your membership?
Yes.
Right.
Don't suppose they'll notice.
So you've got the... was it the OBE? The OBE this year? Right.
Yes, just in time.
Right. And you've had the ceremony for that now?
What?
Have you had the ceremony to get that?
I went and met the Queen and shook hands with her.
Right.
I think I've got a picture of myself somewhere shaking hands with the Queen. I have a great respect for the Queen. I think she does a very difficult job, as well as anybody could expect. And I think she's clustered up with people who are trying to spoil it for her. Well, this is called Terrorists.
Right.
I wrote it on October the 5th, apparently. They care not who they kill or maim, the very young or old perhaps, desire for comradeship or fame, or secret power or special maps, have special meetings, secret signs, all aimed at getting their desires by bombs or guns or fires or mines. What matter if they're burnt in fires? Revolt against their government, starvation, poverty, disease, maybe such sufferers repent clashes with duty-bound police. But when real violence is aimed to change another country's laws, by death or mayhem or disease, all incidental to their cause, this calls for international law. Culture, religion, politics must be discussed and catered for. Disease, starvation, dirty tricks should all be openly discussed. Motive, to do best what is right, not talked about and left to rust like Europe 76 and 8 and Tokyo Summit 86 until the USA is raped and international conscience pricked ensure no guilty one's escape. What was the UN conceived for? All nations have a part to play. General Assembly instead of war. All there to listen, say their say. Give the UN complete support and power and international law, and SAS, though dearly bought, what are those Bush's billions for?
It's Bush's billions is a nice
Yes.
kind of
I wrote somewhere once about the burning bush, but I thought if I that got out, it might be dangerous to me.
You might have a missile landing on your doorstep.
But the reference to burning bush is that it kept on burning but wasn't destroyed, was it? But I've forgotten where it was. And I've written another. Shall I be making others mad by what I'm going to write? It comes from lying awake in bed instead of sleep at night. It struck me that our inmost thoughts, leading to strong beliefs, are most concerned with what we're taught by scholars and by priests, our superstitions classified from when man wondered how the sun and moon could alternate, and when and how to plough. The prophets preached eye for an eye, then man in God's image, and women even more like him, emerges in our age. Worship of God is of the truth. We try to understand what is the truth. By thought and deed, reject things out of hand, if they are not confirmed as facts. We have advanced so far that scientists are priests of truth, proven, confirmed, a star to which our wagons can be hitched. But is that our sole aim? Relationships are so complex that all must take the blame. If, as is frequently the need, choice must be made along which of two paths one must proceed, one right, the other wrong. The sin is not of will to take the way one knows one ought. Motives should be single and pure, no hidden vantage sought. And what criteria better used than truth? Forgive your foes, and care for all, forego abuse, aim to reduce their woes. These are the words of man of truth, and thus the words of him, or her, or it, proving forsooth billions of years of time.
So you still go to the Quaker meetings, don't you?
What?
Do you still go to the Quaker meetings?
Oh, I went yesterday, Sunday.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
I go regularly.
Yeah. Do you ever feel moved to speak?
What?
Are you ever moved to speak?
About once a year.
Once a year? Right.
I get actually twice this year, because I got up and spoke about what I thought we should do. I mean, really about the same thing that I thought we should all support the United Nations, and that I believe that I don't believe in anything supernatural, but I believe in the teachings of Jesus.
So do you still play the ninth organ?
Yes, but I can't hear myself. It doesn't sound right to me.
Well, place the tune, see if we can recognise it.
What?
If you place the tune, we'll try and guess what it is.
Yeah.
troubles?
What?
Is it pack up your troubles or long way to Tipperary?
Long way to
Tipperary.
Tipperary. Okay.
Yeah. To me, it doesn't sound right anyway.
Well, you can.
You can get
Yeah.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a tune you'd like me to play.
Oh.
And
Well, I was in a play once.
What?
I was in a play once called "Oh, What a Lovely War."
oh, what a lovely war.
And I had to play the mouth organ, and I played Clementine,
Oh,
which
you
is quite.
didn't play the lovely war one.
No, but Clementine's quite easy actually. I think it's not many notes.
Very good.
Yeah, I think you're about as good as me actually.
What?
You're about as good as me.
About as good as you.
But I have some practice though. So.
Yeah.
Ah.
Do you ever play yours? I thought you went.
No.
Well, I was once asked to join a string quartet.
Really?
Yes. And I'd never played a string instrument. I'd only played the mouth organ and the flute when groups of medical students were going from one hospital to another and that kind of thing. And it was a registrar in medicine who asked me just 2 or 3 years later if I'd join his string quartet. Well, I was so busy I couldn't really afford the time. But I often wished I had done. He became professor at Manchester, and then he became president of the Royal College of Physicians, then he got into the House of Lords, and I think from my point of view it would have been a good thing if I'd joined his string quartet.
So what would you have played?
The cello.
Right.
Oh.
Uh-huh.
Yes, cello's a nice instrument.
What?
The cello's a nice instrument.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he obviously thought that I got something because I'd never played anything else other than those, you see.
Mm.
And I played them from here, always. When I was at school, the headmaster asked people to join the OTC band because he said the OTC is a good thing to have at the school, and if we don't join the OTC, we shall probably lose it. And the school will lose status as a consequence. You see, that's what he meant. I don't know exactly what his words were, and so I joined the OTC and got straight into the band because I was a conscientious objector anyway. And I took the flute license and took takes to water. I could play any tune on the flute. And we went to a summer camp at Strensall. And we entered a band competition, and there were several rounds. Then we got into the final, and in the final we were doing very well. And then we were asked to play something that we'd never played before. And well, the other members of the band, it was a drum and fife band, you see, couldn't play it. But I could, because I knew the tune, and if I knew the tune I could play it. And so we marched around, and I was playing the tune, and the others were all just doing this, you see, without making any tune at all. And we were second. Yes, I was a conscientious objector until I read about Mussolini's nephew, I think it was, who said that when he dropped a bomb into the middle of a crowd of Abyssinians, they opened like the petals of a flower. And I thought, and I really thought, well, you can't tolerate that kind of thing. You've got to get rid of that. And so I was no longer a conscientious objector. And so when Hitler came along about a year later, I was not a conscientious objector for him either.